Hello, welcome to netvn channel. This video shows you how to build a website with two servers. With this method, when one of the two servers has a problem, your website will still work fine. Also, when both servers are in normal state, they will share the load to make your website perform better. The two web servers will automatically synchronize data with each other. In this video I use Ubuntu OS for two servers. I use Wordpress to build my website. The two servers have IP addresses 10.11.32.136 and 10.11.32.146. The virtual IP address is 10.11.32.188. You first configure the load balancer with Apache. Apache used to load balance two servers. Keep alive used to generate virtual IP address 10.11.32.188. Apache is web server software. You open the sysctl config file and add a line like I'm doing. You edit the sysctl configuration file on both servers. You add this line at the end of the file. Then use ctrl-x to save and exit. Next you create a keep alive configuration file on both servers and configure it. You notice the different information between the two keep alive configuration files on the two servers. You configure server 1 priority to be 100 and server 2 to be 99. With such a priority configuration, the first server is always given priority to use the virtual IP address. Next you configure the first server to be master and the second to be the backup server. And of course you configure virtual IP addresses for the two servers. This virtual IP address needs to be the same on both servers. As said at the beginning of the video, the virtual IP address used in this video is 10.11.32.188. In order for two servers to be able to exchange information, you must set the same password on both servers. Here I set the password to 123456. Also, you need to configure your network card to assign virtual IP address to them. After correctly setting up the necessary information, you save and close the keep alive configuration files on the two servers. Now you start keep alive service and see the result. With a higher priority than the first server being used, the virtual IP address 10.11.32.188. If you stop the keep alive service on the first server, the second server will be assigned a virtual IP address 10.11.32.188. So when the first server has a problem, the virtual IP address will be assigned to the second server. Until the first server fixes the problem, the virtual IP address will automatically be reassigned to the first server. Because Apache service uses port 80, so you need to change the default port of Apache. By default, Apache listens to port 80. In this example, I will replace it with port 8080. You can change another port if you want. Letting Apache and hot proxy use the same port 80 will raise an error. Next, you change port 80 to 8080 with the default configuration file of Apache. You change the port of Apache on both servers. Open your web browser and check if you changed it correctly. So I changed the port for Apache. Next step will explain you how to load balance with two servers. I will modify the Apache default site content on both servers so you can better see the results after load balancing. I will create a simple message so you know which server you are currently accessing. You configure hot proxy on each server. If you configure it on both servers at the same time, it will cause an error because the virtual IP address belongs to only one server at a time. Because the first server has a virtual IP address, so I configured hot proxy on the first server. You add the configuration lines and update the virtual IP address. Then add the IP addresses of the two servers. Pay attention to update port 8080 for both servers. If you used a different port for your two servers in the previous step, update accordingly. Like this example, the virtual IP address is 10.11.32.188. The IP address of the first server is 10.11.32.136. The IP address of server 2 is 10.11.32.146. After the configuration is complete, restart the hot proxy service. At this step, you access your website with a virtual IP address. When you refresh your web browser, you will be accessing two different servers. The change line will let you know. And as you can see, users will have access to two different servers in turn. So your site is load balanced with two servers. If you want to monitor the hot proxy service using a graphical interface, you can add the following configuration lines. Here you can customize your username and password as you like. I'm setting up my username netvn and password 123456. You will use the username and password to access the hot proxy monitoring page. Next, you configure hot proxy for the second server. Before configuring hot proxy on the second server, you need to disable the hot proxy service and disable the keep alive service on the first server. Then the virtual IP address will be assigned to the second server. To make it quick, just copy the configuration from the first server to the second and save it. After configuring hot proxy for the second server, don't forget to enable hot proxy and keep alive services on the first server. By this step you have done load balancing with 2 servers. Next steps I will explain you more specific steps to build a real website. That's how to synchronize your database as well as your website's storage directory. Let's sync the database between the 2 servers. Install MariaDB on both servers first. After installing MariaDB, open the configuration file and update the information as above. By default, MariaDB is only used on the local computer. If you want to access it remotely, you need to change it as above. Next, you identify the database servers. For the first server, the identifier is 1. For the second server, the identifier is 2. The identifiers on the 2 servers must be different. After updating the information, save and exit. For the changes to take effect, restart the MySQL service. I will do the database sync configuration on each server. First, I will do it on the first server. The second server will sync data with the first server. On the first server, I create a new user rep user and give this user permission so that the second server can use it to sync with the first server. In addition to the username and password, you get more information about the login, the position. With the information we have, we will synchronize the database on the second server with the first server. You need the IP address of the first server, username, password, log, position to sync with the database on the first server. First server IP address is 10.11.32.136, username is repuser, password is password. Then you copy the login position information. You start the slave and see the status. If you see a message with 2 words yes, the synchronization is successful. Next, I will sync the first server database with the second server. Same steps as above, but only change the order between the 2 servers. On the second server, you create a new account and grant replication permission. To make it easier, I created the same account as on the first server. Then, just like the first server, you get the login position information on the second server. You update the IP address of the server to 10.11.32.146. Next, you update your username, password, login position. With this information, you can synchronize the first server database with the second server. Just like the second server, you check the slave status on the first server for the result. If you receive a message with 2 words yes, you have succeeded. After the databases on the 2 servers have been synchronized, you create a new database for your website. Here I create a new database named WPDB. As you can see, I created a new database on the first server, and on the second server also appeared a new database named WPDB. To be able to access the WPDB database, you create a new user. In this example, I create a new user WP user with password. You will see on the second server also a new user, WP user. So we have configured the databases for the two servers and made sure they are synchronized with each other. Next, I will show you how to sync your website storage folder with Gluster. First of all, you open the hosts file and add the two lines as above. With these two lines, you will define IP address 10.11.32.136 as Web1 and define IP address 10.11.32.146 as Web2. You edit the host file on both servers. Next, you install Gluster on both servers. After the installation is complete, start Gluster. Then you enable Gluster to make sure when the server restarts, the Gluster service still works. To synchronize data with Gluster between two servers, you use the name defined in the previous step. Web1 is the first server. Web2 is the second server. To connect two servers, you only need to do it on one server. Here I work on the first server. Because the two servers are peer-to-peer, you can do it on any server. Next, I create a shared folder volume 1. The data on this shared folder will be synchronized on both servers. To be able to sync your web storage folder, you need to mount the web storage folder with the volume 1 shared folder. Before syncing data, I will delete Apache default HTML file on both servers. I would then mount Apache's default web storage directory with the volume 1 shared folder. This mount will be cancelled when the server restarts. So to make sure the mount doesn't get dropped when the server restarts, you edit the file tab. You perform the mount on both servers and take care to correct the information for each server. After updating the stab file, the mounts will be maintained even if the server is restarted. After you configure web hosting directory sync, you download the latest Wordpress file to the default Apache directory. To ensure synchronization between the two servers, you can check if the files appear on both servers at the same time. As you can see, the files are synced on both servers. You just need to install Wordpress on the first server, the second server will automatically sync. You download Wordpress, extract and grant it permission. Because my servers are on the local network, I need to open the port on the router. The ports to open are 80 and 443. The IP address to configure the port opening is virtual IP address 10.11.32.188. Next is the domain name for the website. I have prepared a free domain name for this website, netvn-site1.tk. Also, I updated the public IP address for that domain. I will use this domain name to configure Wordpress. As you can see, the Wordpress configuration page has appeared. I will get the information about the database configured in the previous step to fill in the information required by Wordpress. I have successfully connected to the database. Next, you set up an admin account for your website. After I get the website, I create a new post to check if it syncs between the two servers. I will power off one of the two servers to see if the site is still up. Specifically here, I power off the first server. And as you can see, the website is still up and running, the post is synced. Thus, the data has been synchronized between the two servers. There is only one final configuration step left, which is to configure the connection encryption between the user and the web server. So I'll power on the first server and configure it first. To configure encryption, I use Let's Encrypt. To avoid conflicts, turn off the second server. Since you changed Apache's default port to 808, you also need to configure Let's Encrypt with port 8080. Next, you enter your email address, select the SSL file, choose Redirect for your website. As you can see, you get a congratulatory message. That means you've succeeded. Now when you visit your website, next to the address bar will appear a lock icon. You do the same encryption configuration on the second server. But remember to turn off the power for the first server to avoid conflict errors. So I will end the video on how to configure load balancer for a website with two servers. Thank you for watching. Good luck. Don't forget to like and subscribe to netvn channel.